Hey there, my name is Shane Craddock, and this is the Inner Edge podcast, where I share a different take on how to lead and live a sustainable, high-performance life. Over the course of different episodes, I'm going to challenge the belief that tension, stress, and struggle are essential to success and creativity. My experience is that there's an easier way, there's a better way, and indeed there's an essential way that we need to explore for the times that we live in. So let's go ahead, let's jump in and explore. Hi there. Welcome to today's episode. I hope wherever you are in the world that you're in good spirits. I was watching a Star Trek movie recently, one I'd actually seen before, and I would admit I'm a bit of a Star Wars, Star Trek-y fan. And the one I was watching was called, I think, Into Darkness, and it has Chris Pine as Captain Kirk and Benedict Cumberbatch actually is the villain, the kind of the goody villain in that particular movie. It's very good, actually, if you're into that kind of stuff. But what caught me this time when I was watching it wasn't the action. It was a scene that actually really struck a chord. And it was a single exchange between Captain Kirk and Spock. Now, okay, I'll have to assume that not everybody listening to this maybe is familiar with Captain Kirk and Spock, even though they're legendary. But Captain Kirk is kind of the swashbuckling, maverick, intuitive captain who is very human, and he's the leader of the Starship Enterprise, and his right-hand person, his first lieutenant, first officer, is Spock. And Spock is from the planet Vulcan, but really they're characterized by being highly intellectual, highly logical, and there's a continuous banter between the two characters of, I suppose, Kirk's humanity with all its flaws, and Spock's focus on the rules and logic. And he's continuously there reminding the captain, no, you can't do this and you can do that, but you can't do this. And he's saying he's very much on the logical, whereas Kirk is very much emotional, human. And there's, in this particular scene, Kirk is telling Spock that he's going to do something. And Spock is pretty much saying to him, look, this isn't logical. You can't do that. It doesn't make any sense. And Kirk kind of shuts him down and says, look, I know it's not logical, but this is my gut. I can't explain it, he said, but this is what we're going to do. And he just basically is the guy in charge and says, shut up, Spock, let's go. And it's actually funny because there's one particular scene at the start of the movie where Spock is in mortal danger and Kirk breaks all the rules to save Spock. And Spock is so rule-focused that he actually reports the captain for saving him because it was against protocol. That's how rule-based he is. So what struck me was it's a very powerful metaphor for leadership and decision making and how we manage ourselves in a world that I think is obsessed with the intellect. And in a way, it's similar to my inner CEO metaphor. In that context, the inner CEO would be Captain Kirk, and Spock would be what I would call the inner COO, the Chief Operations Officer, whose job is to get things done, master systems, master logic, make things work, rule-based, efficiency. So Spock is the COO and Captain Kirk is the inner CEO. And we all have both. We have Captain Kirk inside, which is the real human part of us, our gut, our courage, our soul, our humanity, our emotions, our intuition, that intuitive wisdom that we all have. And Spock is also inside us, the logic, the intellect, the analytical side of us, the kind of the rules bit that, no, you can do this, but you can't do that. And the reality is that for an effective Starship Enterprise or an effective inner world, both are essential. They both have specific roles. For us, it's very much the same in leadership in life. But I think as a human, increasingly, you're going to see more and more, hopefully, the opportunity for the Kirk side of us to be in charge. Because the Kirk side of us is the one that basically makes the game-changing calls. It's the one that comes up with the creative left-of-field ideas that don't seem like they're going to work, but they are the ones to go with. And they are the ones that require courage and the willingness, when necessary, to break the rules. I think the danger in a kind of a high-pressure, data-driven, AI-saturated world is that we default more and more into Spock mode, which is kind of more rational, analytical, and safe. And unfortunately, then we lose access to Kirk inside us, that inner CEO, that deeper wisdom that our gut, our intuition provides. I For my own life, I think this has been part of my own learning and my own journey is recognizing kind of when I'm in Spock mode. And I would have been, I'd say, conditioned into Spock mode, by the way the school system is and maybe by my own nature, and ended up doing engineering, chemical engineering, which was very much into, logic and a certain way of thinking. But if I look back at my own life, where I've made the biggest changes, the biggest game-changing changes, it's been from Kirk's side, the gut, the intuition. I've seen the same with clients. And when you get into it, if you can cultivate a calm, clear, centered mind, what I call a 3C state, more and more, it's easier and easier to kind of know which is your gut and which is your intellect, which is Spock. And I think ultimately every entrepreneur, every CEO will know that their gut decision, very often, it isn't random or reckless. It's informed by experience. It's probably at some level a subconscious pattern recognition based on maybe years of experience, and also maybe based on emotional intelligence, soul intelligence. Sometimes you just can't explain why you know something. And in my experience, working with leaders over 25 years, I think a lot of leaders over-rely on their intellect. Maybe because it's an egotistical thing that they're almost proud of their intellect. It might feel safer to justify decisions with information and data. It might allow you to avoid vulnerability. You don't have to admit, I can't explain it, I just know. And I've heard that from the best people I've ever worked with. They'd often say that, I can't explain it, I just know. And I think culturally, certainly in the Western world, we've been rewarded for being smart, intellectually smart, not necessarily for being deeply intuitive. But I think we're at a pivot point where that is going to change. And I think the pain of the incredible tsunami of change that's coming towards us because of the acceleration of AI and what that's going to bring with it, I think it's going to put a higher emphasis on how do you lead from your deeper intuition, your deeper wisdom, especially when AI is going to take over essentially all the intellectual challenges. So the issue, I guess, the problem could be that, data without your gut or intuition can be slow, can be uninspiring, and you miss opportunities. And you can't necessarily, you can't spreadsheet your way through every decision, especially in complex, fast-moving environments like we're in now. And it's funny, I've often spoken to, I suppose, as an engineer originally myself, I'm able to talk to technical people, but it's funny, they'll often say to me, like, no, there's nothing like a good spreadsheet. They love analysis and playing around with numbers, but you stay too much in that mode, which is Spock mode, you lose your humanity. I've had several conversations, even over the years with CEOs and their COOs. Very often, sometimes the COO will think that they can do the CEO job, but that is up for grabs, because just because you're a good COO doesn't mean you have what it takes to be Captain Kirk. And that's not a slight on you. It's just more to do with when you get into a CEO slot, to be an effective CEO in today's world. Yes, that intellect is hugely powerful, but in terms of relation to people, in terms of reading a room, in terms of inspiring people, which is critical to leadership, in terms of reading the emotional intelligence, empathy, the ability to have a clear mind under pressure, the ability to build relationships, the ability to make those leaps and be brave. They're all kind of to do with Captain Kirk. Now, I think it's inside everybody, but not everybody necessarily is willing to go into that area of themselves. But I do think that this Captain Kirk side of us is a competitive advantage in times of uncertainty, which is, by the way, right now. It's everywhere. So here's a question for you. Where in your life or in your business or leadership are you perhaps defaulting to Spock mode? Where might you be overthinking, being over analytical, being over logical, maybe being over safe? And when was the last time you brought in your Captain Kirk? As in, you trusted your gut or your intuition and it paid off? Like, when was the last time for you that happened? And maybe bring it into action. Like, what small decision today could you make from a Kirk place instead of a Spock place? What could you focus on and say, do you know what, for that one, I'm just going to go with Captain Kirk. Captain Kirk never had all the answers. Captain Kirk used to often make a leap of faith. And just obviously it's the movie, so it generally always works out because he's the hero. There's no guarantees, but I know looking back at my own life, there's some of the best things I've ever done came from bringing in my Captain Kirk. It doesn't mean I'm not scared. It doesn't mean that I don't have that uncertainty and have to work with it. But once you jump like Captain Kirk, it kind of brings its own action. And I think in the age of AI and high-speed intellect, which is where we're at right now as I'm recording this, I think ChatGPT just launched yesterday. So, we're into super intellect right now. Your competitive edge is going to be your ability to access the intelligence that machines, that computers can't replicate. And what is that? That's your intuition. That's your empathy. That's your courage. That's your creativity. That's your deeper wisdom. So, as a little challenge for the next few days, maybe be open to noticing one decision where maybe you feel torn. You're not quite sure what to do. And maybe just pause and look at it and bring in the metaphor of Spock and Kirk. Maybe acknowledge, okay, what's the Spock in me saying about this? It's not logical. I don't have enough information. What if this? What if that? So that's Spock. And we all have it. And then ask, though, with the same decision, okay, hang on. What does my Kirk know? And what does Kirk feel we should do? Which is your gut, your intuition. And just see what happens. And if you want to let me know, maybe you try this experiment, let me know. Email me, shane@shanecraddock.com, 1D. And I'm curious to see what you do, because generally, if nothing else, just like Captain Kirk and the Starship Enterprise, you're going to go on an adventure to boldly go where no one has gone before. And if nothing else, you'll have a few stories to tell. So to close out, I think, data and information does make us informed without a doubt. But your gut, your intuition, your deeper wisdom, that's what makes you human. And we need both. But I think that Captain Kirk side of us, that gut intuition side of us, really, that's what makes us great. That's it for this week. Ciao for now.